Friends, this is a book called Power Within, The Leadership Legacy of Narendra Modi. As I mentioned to you, this book was released by the Honorable Prime Minister himself. And this book is about Western thought on leadership. It's trait-oriented. It emphasizes the importance of being a leader. Indian leadership offers a contrast. It focuses on the exercise of leadership. I think, Gaurav, you'll be the right person to talk about the book. We'll not go into too much into it. And I'll just briefly read about the author. The author is Dr. R. Balasubramaniam, and having embarked on his journey in the development sector by living and working for several years among remote forest-based tribal communities in the southern Indian district of Mysuru, Dr. Balasubramaniam Balu is a widely respected development activist, leadership trainer, thinker, and writer. He is a member HR in the Capacity Building Commission of the Government of India. He is also a visiting professor at Cornell University, USA, and IIT Delhi, India, where he teaches courses on leadership and human development. He is chairman of the Social Stock Exchange Advisory Committee set up by SEBI. After his MBBS, Dr. Subramaniam earned his MPhil in Hospital Administration and Health Systems Management from BITS Pilani. He has a master's in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School, Harvard University. His living habits were greatly influenced by teachings of Swami Vivekananda, and at the age of 19, he founded the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement based on the principles of Ahimsa, Satya, Seva, and Tyag. He has spent more than 3 decades of his life in the service of rural and tribal poor in the forests of India. He is also the founder of Grassroots Research Advocacy Movement, a public policy think tank in India. Dr. Balu embodies a rare blend of grassroots and macro perspectives and policy through his multifaceted experience of more than 3 decades. He is a Tata Scholar, a Mason Fellow of the Harvard Kennedy School, and a Fellow at the Hawser Center for Civil Society, Harvard University. He was heading and visiting the professor at the Vivekananda Chair, University of Mysore twice. He is a regular columnist in national dailies and has authored 7 books, both in Kannada and English. More about him, his workbooks are at www.drrbalu.com. Can we have a round of applause for Dr. Balu himself, yeah? Just a second. Na, abhi baki hai. And we also have Gaurav Chaudhary, a professional journalist, 2 minutes, and has been a part of the media fraternity for more than 27 years. इनके साथ मुझे काम करना आगे. He is currently the co-founder and CEO of Earshot Digi Media, India's first Dolby-powered digital audio and broadcasting ventures for news and infotainment content, bringing together the country's leading editors and journalists besides top radio professionals. He has worked in leading media houses and leadership positions. He served as executive editor of Network 18, moneycontrol.com, and can be seen regularly on television discussions on policy and economy. He remains engaged with Network 18 as a group consulting editor. Gaurav joined Network 18 from Hindustan Times, where he worked for more than a decade in various capacities, including the economics editor. He is a trained economist with a master's in economics from Delhi School of Economics. Gaurav is passionate about his native state, Assam, and the mighty Brahmaputra that nourishes it. Thank you so much. Before I request them to step on the stage, we'll do a small group photograph with the book. Just.
A very good afternoon. It's a hot and humid day. It's the monsoon leg of the Delhi Lit Fest. We did have a little bit of rain in the morning, but nonetheless, we could do a little bit more. It's a good time to talk about leadership because, as we all know, I would not say we're going through a crisis, but we're going through a serious transformation so far as leadership in all realms of life is concerned, from political to non-political to corporations to organizations, and even in sports. Dr. Balu, let me start off with a basic but nonetheless fundamental question. And leadership in most strands of thoughts, in fact all strands of thought, is interpreted as having the power to lead organizations and people to bring in change. However, we have seen in history, and there is enough evidence, that having assumed power, leaders often lean more and more on the power attached to that position. Leadership is not just about exerting influence and authority over people and organization, isn't it? Help us understand this through the lens of Indic strand of leadership, both as a strand of thought as well also in practice.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here and allowing me to share some thoughts on leadership. I think fundamentally we need to appreciate that we all blindly imitate the Western narrative of leadership. Though my training was on that, it took me some while to recognize that it's inadequate in describing leadership from several of what I discovered from my research. So just to give a few distinguishing separations, in the West, if you don't have followers, you're not a leader. Because they celebrate leader and not leadership. That's a very big difference. And your identity stems from the fact that you have 20 people to influence behind you. So if you're not able to influence, you're no good. Whereas India celebrates actions of individuals, which is leadership. So there's a huge difference. In the West, you don't get recognized if you can't solve problems. I am the CEO of my company. People barge into my room and say, you know what, you're paid to be a CEO, solve this problem. So we thrive and rejoice in being the lone martyr out there trying to solve the world's problems. But in India, it's not about, like Prime Minister Modi himself says, "Main nahi hum." And it's a huge distinction. Though it's a nice slogan is what people think, but it's a very deep conviction. And for us, leadership, real evolution of leadership in India is about subsuming the I. It's about the I disappearing and melting into the service that you do. Acts of leadership that melts your ego down. So it's not about your focus on the work at the center that you set out to do. It's about the work at the center itself. Whereas the West celebrates, and I should be seen as doing the work at the center. Only then I get the recognition of being a leader. Right. So increasingly distinct here is leadership as an opportunity for spiritual evolution, whereas on the other hand, it is enabling your ego is what the Western understanding of a leader does.
Absolutely. Mark Twain once famously said that the two most important days in your life is the day first when you were born and the second when you actually find out why you were born. In the Indic school of thought, this finds resonance to Atmada Moksharthana Jagatiyata Cha, which essentially means actualizing oneself through serving for others. In your book, you kind of allude to Prime Minister Modi as an exemplar of this. Can you help us understand that?
I think for this I got to possibly talk about an anecdote which has never been in the public domain till now. Because this book is a result of 16 years of my research on Indic scriptures, and it captures a lot from that, and 2 years of research specifically into 50 years of Prime Minister Modi's life. And there's one incident which actually happened when you were 6 or 7 years old. Little village of Gujarat, all of us know how a rural life would have been maybe 74 years ago. But the point is, there was a barren couple who were neighbors to Modi's family. And that couple didn't have a child for a long time, so there's a lot of longing for a child. And after a long period of longing, a baby was born. The whole village celebrated. And so this young little child, Modi, was first of all impressed and then confused that, the whole village celebrates somebody's child being born. Today we are so individualistic, you'll have to even RSVP whether you're attending the birthday or not. And those days were different, everybody celebrated. But within a week of the child being born, the baby dies. And the whole village goes into gloom. But more importantly, after the baby dies, there's a cow in that family. The family with the child died. And the cow actually stops eating food when the baby dies. And Modi is confused. He goes to his father and asks him, why is the cow not eating its fodder every day? And possibly his father, typically the way any father would respond to a 7-year-old child, tells him, no, beta, that's how the cow is grieving for the death in the family. And a 7-year-old obviously believed that. And the next week the cow also dies. And Modi then as a child feels, if a cow can grieve so deeply for another human being and die, how strongly should I be concerned about mitigating the suffering of fellow human beings? And that is what Warren Bennis, a leadership expert, calls it crucible moments in lives. All of us have those crucible moments. For most of us, they are not crucible moments, they're just memory points. We say, 30 saal ke baad ye hua tha, 50 saal ke baad mujhe experience tha. They just become data points in experience. Real crucible moments, when you think about it, live it, resonate with it, reflect on it, and then internalize it to be part of your DNA. So for Modi, that crucible moment was where it struck him that seva and seva for others is my life. And if you see 50 years of his life, whether as Pracharak or as a organizing secretary of the party or as a chief minister or as prime minister, what is constant has been seva bhav. The expressions of seva is varied. And Atmano Mokshartam Jagat Hitaya Cha, I use it in the book in the context of, it's a Vedic statement actually. It comes from the Vedas, and Swami Vivekananda popularized it. He gives it as the motto of the Ramakrishna order itself. And you should understand, it's a spiritual order. And he says, in one of his writings, he says, sitting in the Himalayas and meditating is of no use to anybody except the meditator, maybe. He said, what use is that? In a country where the masses are suffering, there's no point in exercising your personal evolution by sitting in the Himalayas. So he says, he recalls his Vedic statement and says, our evolution, our moksha is important, but our moksha should be through external manifestation of seva of others. So मेरा आत्मा का मोक्षा होना चाहिए, लेकिन जगत के हित भी होना चाहिए. So my expression of leadership should always be for the other, and the other's evolution is in what I need to see my evolution. And Gandhi says it so beautifully. We got to dissolve ourselves in the service of others, and that's what I write.
Absolutely. Just taking on from there, there's in the Indic way of life, in the Indic philosophical trend of thought, there's the importance of karuna can never be, or compassion can never be overemphasized, because it's more than an emotional response. It's kind of a life principle, and determines your attitude towards others and environment. Do you think that is somewhat in short supply now among leaders across all spheres of life, not necessarily politics, but also corporate and other organizations?
I think there's an answer in your question itself. It is in short supply, others we wouldn't be talking about it. Again, it's because of the changing paradigm of the expression of leadership. Now, leadership, if it is seen as an individual act for glorifying myself, aggrandizing myself, and for seeking some evolution of my own self, it will not be loaded in the compassion that we talk about. But I define leadership in the book slightly differently. I say leadership is about swadhyaya, understanding myself. That's what the Bhagavad Gita talks about. But understanding myself to appreciate that I'm only seeing myself as a dual element. But the real challenge of leadership is to understand the other, and appreciate the actions that binds the self to the others. And in those actions, if you can actually see the other as yourself and yourself as other, that's the oneness that I write. That's the real Advaitic expression that you can actually look for. In that space, it can only happen with compassion. Because if you have to see the divinity in the other, today leadership thrives by fragmentation. But if you really want to understand the oneness and the interconnectedness of mankind itself, it only thrives on compassion. So I think karuna is such a powerful initiator of leadership. And if you look at the West, even they started off thinking like that. They talk of leadership as 3 levels. You got to motivate people, you got to actually strategize what you have to do with the motivation, and then you got to act on it. It's in a different way. More than 100 years ago, Vivekananda writes so beautifully. He said, for anybody in leadership position, he only needs 3 heads, he says. You need the heart to feel, the head to think, and the hands to work. So motivation, strategy, action is defined differently in our context. It's defined differently in the West.
We'll also have to deal with the cultural contradictions of capitalism, but I'll come to that in a moment from now. Before that, let me also try and ask you about the whole attribute of equanimity, and it's an essential attribute for very effective leadership. It falls right at the intersection of spiritualism, and leadership. That said, do you think, since you talked about, and you mentioned about the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, that's why I'm asking about equanimity. That said, in a practical sense, in a pragmatic sense, is it possible for any leader to actually, take decisions? Is it an attainable, practicable goal?
I think most people misunderstand the Gita. And this oft-quoted statement, Karmanya Vadikaraste, I believe is the most misinterpreted statement. Unfortunately, in a country even like India, we think you got to stay detached of your actions, which is also sort of people communicated in such a way as you will actually have no actions, then the world will come to an end. So it's not about detaching yourself from actions. It's so beautifully, again, Vivekananda says it. He says detached attachment and attached detachment. You got to be attached to the action when you're performing them. He says as though the whole work depends on you. So what you're actually detaching yourself is from the spirit of doership. I am doing this. I am the CEO of the company. I am the president of the country. And detaching yourself as much from the consequence of your doership, the enjoyership. So it's not about the doing and the enjoying. It's about detaching yourself from the doership and the enjoyership, which is a very advanced level of thinking. I think most leaders were to subscribe to that, and I can give an example in Prime Minister Modi's life, which I have personally had ability to do a research and study deeply about. A simple thing like the farm laws. The rest of the country, they're just inconvenience of 1 year's blockade or newspaper headlines for a few months and then it fatigues out. But the commitment and conviction the Prime Minister had in doubling farmers' income, relooking at the agrarian economy of this country, talking about a 30-year-old Swaminathan committee report and saying what is relevant today and how do I actually practicalize it. And then passionately believing it will change India. And then a year later, he had to go out there and say, I'm sorry, I screwed up, I made a mistake. Apologizing to the same farming community and said, maybe I didn't do my homework enough, maybe I didn't know how to communicate it enough, I'm withdrawing the farm law. After both the actions, even he was not exuberantly celebrating after the law was passed in Parliament, nor was he despondent as what people believed he would be after he withdrew the bill. He was unaffected. So the Gita talks about two very powerful concepts. It talks about samatvam, where you are level-headed and unaffected by that. That can only happen when you have you are actually devoid of the enjoyership. It talks of ekatvam, the interconnectedness. Only of these two can you exercise sthita pragnati, or the equipoise. I think for every real good head of organizations, countries, companies, whatever you call it, if you are not able to transcend, that is where India doesn't celebrate the I. If you celebrate the I, you can never transcend it. If you celebrate actions that you engage in and then detach yourself from the I of doing it or enjoying it, then I think you'll take the organizations to great heights.
Absolutely. You know, and you allude to this in a very detailed manner in a book, but I just wanted to ask you about the role of communication for effective leadership, and that can never be overemphasized. In the Indic sense, in the Indic strand of thought, we have a very structured, what is described as the Sadharanikaran model of communication. How different is this from the established Western models of communication? Do they work at cross purposes?
In fact, the whole chapter that I've dedicated, Communicating to Lead, and talking about Prime Minister's communication, today he had a Mann Ki Baat session, or the regular Mann Ki Baat he has, or when he talks in the political platforms, when he talks in the cabinet, or when he talks in the state platform, it's completely different. We teach our students in the policy school, whether it's Harvard or other places where I'm associated with, we teach our students communication and how do you communicate policy making. So we talk of dispersive communication models, participatory communication model, we talk of Shannon-Weaver model, the semiotic school of thought. Everything is an evolving science. If I were to write a paper as an academic, I want to make the world believe that I discovered it. But I might be building on somebody else's knowledge all the time, but we always give it a nice name. More than 3,000 years ago, Bharata in his Natya Shastra describes communication exactly very similar to how the West has described it today. I encode something as I'm talking in my mind. I pass it on to the audience sitting here, and with their ability of decoding, they appreciate it. That is why I can never say everybody in this room is understanding me exactly the same way as I meant it to be. It's impossible. But in India, Indian style of communication says it's possible. Because in the Western model, you look at noise or the distraction that happens in the ecosystem, which our minds are focused on 100 other things. So we don't really appreciate it the way I should appreciate it. Whereas Bharata in his Natya Shastra talks of rasa and bhava. He says if you actually elevate communication with something very important, where you actually get oneness of the heart, if saharidayata happens, in that space of communication, there's a space of oneness where what you communicate is actually experienced as an emotive space by the other, and communication is complete. That's what happens in music. I was hearing the performance off and on from the, though I was not watching the musician, the way he sings, you can actually appreciate the bhav that he's bringing into it. Or a Bharatanatyam dancer in the face, and one moment she's feeling helpless, other moment she's expressing love for Krishna, the third moment she's Kali and wanting to kill. And the audience, today neurobiologically we say the neurons get mirrored, and we experience it intensely, and we feel we are that. That is what the Prime Minister is capable of doing. So when he's in a meeting or when he's in an address, he strikes at the saharidayata. And therefore, the intensity with which he can be able to communicate and the way it can resonate with the listener is a completely different level. And that's a huge difference between the Western model of communication, where the space for an emotive oneness is not there. Obviously, now there is research going on. I write about it also. Otto Schwammer in MIT's work, he talks about theory U and 4 ways of listening. And he describes the 4th highest method called the co-generative space of listening. That is the Saharidayata that I talk about.
Since you're talking about Saharidayata, it's shared understanding, or and it's an important pillar of the Sadharikaran model, is consensus building. To what extent do you think the world is actually not, the leaders are actually not relying on that, and is consensus building is something that we should see more?
No, I won't agree with that. In my book, I argue the other way around. I say, in India, communication is not to build consensus. Communication to respectfully communicate my point of view. It is never to influence you and get you around to my point of view. Consensus demands that I'm able to influence you to accept what I'm saying. It's my way or the highway, and therefore you agree to what I say, and that's it. In India, it's not that. It's a gentle way of communicating to you, and I leave the freedom to you. I respect the freedom. That's the co-generative space, where I might also change my opinion after that. So I think that's the power of the way I have described it. And so it's not about consensus today. If everybody agrees to it, then we don't need so many people at all. Right? So it's actually getting dissent expressed respectfully, dissent expressed in a democratized way, where dissent is expressed for the common good. If it is expressed for proving my point and my intellectual superiority over you, that is what starts the space of argumentation, not even a discourse or a debate. To me, communication is about communicating my views in a way in which I can resonate with your bhava, and listening to your views with the same respect that I would like you to give me, and listening to that. That is missing today. So it's not about consensus, it's about ability to see differences respectfully.
Right. Let's change tack a bit. Let's talk about the cultural contradictions of capitalism, as it were, and the world finds itself right in the middle of this contradiction. The need for retaining or maintaining cultural values actually is seen at odds with the requirements of a functioning capitalist system. In India, for instance, many see the need for protecting our civilizational pride and cultural values actually is pulling in the opposite direction so far as economic ambitions are concerned. In fact, Danny Roderick explains this, describes this as a trilemma of sorts, inescapable trilemma, where he says that the trifecta of the nation state, democracy, and globalization are incompatible. What's your view on this?
I deliberately write about it to Danny Roderick is a good friend, so what I think I can take the liberty of intellectually criticizing him, is that I think it's not correct. Again, let me explain where I come from. See, the West looks at harmonization. The West always believes that if you don't agree to my point of view, you're the backward guy. I am far ahead in the race intellectually, and therefore you're not caught up with me. That's the way West looks at it. So whether it's human rights, whether it's democracy, whether it's leadership, they believe that my model is perfect. You guys are backward. You natives don't know enough, and so you're backward, so you have to catch up with me. So the desire to harmonize, it is their democratic model they want everywhere. Our democracy is far older. It is their method of listening and leadership that they want, and if they can't, they don't have the research tools or the cultural background or the appropriateness to see through our lens. That is where we Indians have a unique perspective. And so when Danny Roderick says that, he says it without appreciating the civilizational strength every culture brings into its narrative, whether it's China, whether it's India. And I talk about it from the perspective of saying that for us, in my last chapter when I write about it, when I talk about it in a different context, maybe I'm jumping a little ahead, but I talk about how the sovereign state, which is a very, very Western-led appreciation, the Leviathan thinking. Whereas in India, that is not the way we looked at it. We saw it as Purusharthas, and I talk about Artha is important. You need to make money. Like Vivekananda says, you can't teach Bhagavad Gita on an empty stomach. So it's not about not making money. But if you have to think about compassionate capitalism, you got to think of what the Prime Minister says, lifestyle for economy. You have to learn to balance ecology with economy. I've also described the example I give of the Palasa tree, and how in Yajurveda it describes that I have to do the sacrifice, but oh tree, please forgive me for using your twig for the sacrifice. Even the small act of sacrifice of a small little twig that is even fallen down, if it's fallen down, I thank the tree. If I'm breaking it, I ask forgiveness from the tree. I've lived with tribals, and the Jainu Kurba community lives on honey. Jainu is honey in Kannada. They sing a song when they go to collect honey, and the song they sing after they collect honey is different. When they're going to collect honey, they sing a song of the greatness of the honeybee, the labor the honeybee does, etc. When they're coming back, they're asking for forgiveness. And asking for forgiveness, saying that I have no choice but to collect your honey because it's medicine for me, please forgive me. I need the honey. And they don't slice the entire hive. If you see how they do it, they slice the lower half of the hive. The real honey is in the upper half. So they get very little honey and they climb 50 feet for that and they get it. So I used to wonder, how stupid can they be? Why can't they get the whole honey? And they would tell me, we are stealing honey. We are not even taking it. And so in stealing, we are robbing the honey of its future, next 1 year's collection. And so we have no right to do that. They actually put the queen back into the hive. They take it out and put it back. So to me, the Indic way of thinking is building on a civilizational strength is getting this back. We have been imitating the consumerist model so much that we have lost compassion in our capitalism. It's just making money at any cost that's driving every one of us. So can we now stop back and look at what our scriptures talk about? It so beautifully says, only 25% of your wealth is yours. Right. Call it what you want. You know, the budget session is over. Everybody only looks at the taxes. They forget to understand as citizens, our responsibility is to ask, is the state using my tax properly? We forget that, we only want to pay less tax. General assumption, I'm not saying everybody thinks like that. The 25% he says it's for your family. You can't let your family down. If you're a householder, you have a responsibility. It's for you, your children, whatever you have to live, eat, etc. 25% they say is for society. You can't let down society. You are not earning it for yourself, you're a custodian of wealth. And 25% is for a rainy day. Our economy could see through a lot of challenges because our savings economy is very high. Now everybody is nervous, SEBI is nervous, everybody is nervous because we are diluting our savings in the interest of making more money. We are not sure we're going to make it. The mutual fund craze and all that's happening today. So our script, that's why I try to argue and say the real model is balancing civilizational thinking. The state is necessary. State has to facilitate this through policies and structures because we are already a state, whether you like it or not. The individual has to be responsible. He can't run away from it. And we have to integrate ourselves to the rest of the world, at least to stand out and teach the world what is a successful economic order. We have destroyed ourselves by imitating the economic order that we have. We have to recreate a more stakeholding related, compassionate, capitalistic driven, for benefit economic order. You know, you're an economist, so you'll appreciate it.
Yeah, so no, I'll just stick to that point on capitalism. Compassionate capitalism is one thing, but creating wealth is also, and creating wealth for everyone in an equitable manner is also something that the government has to pursue as a stated goal. Now, how can you follow a model of capitalist economy and within the framework of a globally established capital structure and reconcile to what you were saying? Because the institutions of capitalism are all global and mostly identical across countries.
I think what I'm trying to present is a completely different way of thinking. Let's look at traditionally in the economic model today, we see three sectors. The primary driver of economic growth and development is the state. Even if you look at an intensely market-driven space like the United States, if you remove all the policies that facilitates and allows the private sector to thrive, it will collapse. But the state is the primary driver and catalyst, whether you like it or not. The second sector, what we call is the corporate world or the private sector and initiative enterprise is rewarded. You work hard, you make your money. Nobody can complain about it. The third sector, which is traditionally called the third sector, the civil society sector, which worries about equity and everybody, the gap between the rich and the poor coming down and all those kind of socialistic aligned thinking. I believe all of them have their strengths. We got to take the best of the DNA of these three and create a fourth sector. And that's what the Indic thinking is. Take the public responsibility, obligation of the state, the efficiency and enterprise of the private sector, the social spread of the civil society sector, and put it together. And that's the economic model that can drive, which is the shift I'm asking is from a profit maximization thinking, which is what is driving the economic model today. And the West is shifting actually, if you look at it, whether the B Corp in the US or Panama has even passed a law for that, to a benefit optimization model. Right. The moment you move from profit maximization to benefit optimization, you actually touch the model that our Purusharthas talk about, where Dharma is a foundation. Artha is also important. Kama is important. Without desire, there will be no consumption. But everything is for finally for my alleviation or my moksha. And unless you see it in that spirit, and that's what I write. So Purusharthas is not just a way of life. Purusharthas is possible in a wonderfully, if you apply it in the way I'm talking, it's a great economic model that I'm pushing for.
Absolutely. I think the problem is not as much with profit maximization. I think the problem is more with supernormal profits that large corporations are actually trying to achieve. And that is where, the pulls from opposite directions are coming. But I would like to ask you a question on the title of the book, Power Within. Are you trying to build a case here or trying to present a case here that great leaders have the ability to, all great leaders have the ability to look inward and present a compelling story with passion and authenticity?
It's again a title. I particularly like this title also. Obviously, I fall in love with what I've written. But it's because to distinguish between the Western narrative of leadership and the Indic thinking of leadership. It's not just about leadership. India always thrived on control of external nature.
Right.
So whether it is discovering the binary system, metallurgy to algebra to calculus, we really looked at our science mastering the outside. Without the binary system, we wouldn't have AI and ML today. But what is really celebrated? How many of us actually remember all those people who discovered all this? But what is celebrated is control of internal nature. No, we remember our rishis, and in every subhashita or mantra that we recite, it's always acknowledging the contribution of the rishi. Swamiji says, Vivekananda says it so beautifully. He says, India's civilizational strength is not what it built outside, it's important, but what it enabled us to understand, to see ourselves from inside. The reason I titled it this way is many years ago when my research on leadership was deep. There's a book called The Myth of a Strong Leader. Some of us might have read it. Archie Brown's analysis of 5 political leaders from around the world, mostly the West and Russia, where he argues about, it's a myth, you can't have a strong leader. It's not compatible to societal progress. And when I went deep into it and I re-looked at it when I started writing this book, the way they measure leadership and success of leadership is the power without. How much can I control you? How much can I control my electorate? How much can I control the citizens from agreeing to what I say? And that's why he says you can't do it, and that's a myth. So the metric that is deployed by the Western world in appreciating leadership is the more I can control, the more numbers I have as followers, the better I am. It suddenly occurred to me, Kautilya in his Arthashastra says it so beautifully. He says there are only 2 responsibilities for a ruler. No, I see this pattern, whether it's Mahabharata, Ramayana, I finally distilled out essence of Kautilya is this. He says there are only 2 responsibilities in statecraft for a ruler. One is Loka Sangraha, simple, plain societal welfare, and whatever society at that point of time sees as welfare. Second is Yoga Kshema, which means ensuring that the benefits of the securities I'm creating as a ruler is available to everybody without differentiation, and I keep enabling acquisition of more securities. For this, he says, only a ruler, which is the Indriya Vijayi, who's controlled his senses, can actually deliver on this. Without Indriya Nigraha, he says, a ruler cannot deliver on Yoga Kshema and Loka Sangraha. And that is the power within. So the more the opportunities of working at this level, reporting to the Honorable PM in the role I have with the Capacity Building Commission, having interviewed him several times for this book, spoken to his close colleagues, what comes out as a constant is his ability to be constantly, sincerely attempt Indriya Nigraha. And I think that is where I talk about the power within. And again, a lot of my work is from Vivekananda. And so when Vivekananda says, he says, the more you think of the other, the human dynamo within you activates. And an extraordinary power gets unleashed. The more you work for the others, so he even says selfishness is sin. Selflessness is what is really that we need, but he says people don't have the patience to practice it. Here in my research, I discovered 50 years of what is constant is his actions, not for himself, but for public good. And therefore, I thought it's an expression of power within.
Absolutely. And one last question before I throw it open briefly for questions from the floor. It would not be incorrect to say that we are at the cusp of some kind of a protracted chaos. And you mentioned that in the epilogue of your book. There are two broad stakeholders here. One is the sovereign individual, which you describe as a technological global somnambulist. And there is also the surveillance state. So as an individual, everyone, because of technology, is as global as anyone is. And we have everyone we know is now an opinion maker. Everyone has an opinion, and we can air our opinion. Technology has enabled that. And then we have the surveillance state. मैं क्या खा रहा हूँ, कहाँ जा रहा हूँ, क्या लिख रहा हूँ, क्या नहीं कर रहा हूँ. The government is watching like a big brother. This is pulling in different directions, and this has led to, in many instances, also in India, collapse of existing public institutions. As a sovereign individual, I am well within my right to do whatever I want. In the broader sense, I'm saying. Whereas the government is constantly surveying me through various measures. It's not just relevant only for India, but it's limited, it's all across the world. Do you think leaders of today and tomorrow are equipped enough to deal with this?
I think most are not. And I say this with a lot of responsibility. Close to 65% of the world is having elections this year. Okay? How many leaders are able to think behind the electoral benefit that they have by standing for elections? Every leader has to be short-term in his thinking to win an electoral battle. If you can call it democracy, so be it. But the only country, the only public leader in the world, and I write about it in an earlier chapter saying India talks of Shreyas and Preyas. In the short term, all of us look at extravagant enjoyment of our short-term gains. You know, if I eat ice cream now, I feel happy. If I use television for 24 hours a day, I consume a lot of power. But every time we actually pose a question on ChatGPT, how many of us think about the electricity that's generated to respond to my query? It could be some stupid question. Who the hell is Balasubramaniam? You can go ask on ChatGPT. It may give you an answer. Google consumes X amount of power, ChatGPT consumes 4x power for the same answer. We don't even think of it, right? We don't balance short-termism with long-termism. Prime Minister Modi has his extraordinary ability to find the mid-path to find that balance. The balance of short-termism, in policy world we call it short-termism, long-termism. In the world of Indic scriptures, it is Shreyas and Prayas. Not only that, you have to find a balance between a facilitatory state. He talks of Jan Bhagidari today. A state thrives on control and power. A state, James Scott, in seeing like a state, I actually refer and say it here, seeing like a state on steroids today. No country in the world is not watching its citizens. Let's be clear. Every time you transact digitally, you're tracked, you're known. The state knows you. Your habits are known, your patterns are known. The bar you go to pay your credit card bill, they know what liquor you're drinking. Everything is known. So let's not fool ourselves. Everywhere in the world, okay? But the point is, am I a gentle person who doesn't want to see? I know I can see it, but I don't want to see it. So I have to facilitate and balance this. Post-COVID, every time, all of us wanted to be safe in COVID, so we didn't care about getting vaccinated. But the moment you got vaccinated and registered on the COVID app, the state knows you had a vaccination. Now you can't dispute it. Every time you cross a fast tag, well, you want the benefit of not stopping at the toll gate and pass through the toll. But every time you fast tag, the fast tag clicks, somebody is knowing your travel there, your car has traveled there. Now you can't disown it and say, I want the benefit of the time being saved as well as not being monitored. So my argument is, can we bring a state where I'm responsible, facilitatory, not destroy your enterprise and your ability to want to be independent, but you're not truly independent. You already sold yourself to the megaliths of the world, Googles and Amazons, etc. Every time you're pushed by this book, if you're sitting here, I'm sure you will get a message from Google, buy Power Within. Right? And that's the reality. So are you really independent? But finding this balance is the responsibility of the state, and I think the state has to find it. India could be a model if it does what I'm saying, where it's driven by Dharma. So my last chapter is titled The Dharma of Legacy and the Legacy of Dharma.
Absolutely. Now, on a lighter note, when you talked about short-term and long-term in the current context, everyone is talking about short-term and long-term capital gains tax and what has been announced in the budget. We'll leave that for a different, but I would like to throw this open for questions if there are any. Please raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. There's a question. Can we get a mic here, please?
Hello, thank you
I
for.
think it's not on, I think.
The mic is not on.
Okay, thank you for the nice discussion. Actually, I go here and there, and wherever we go, actually, whatever issues and challenges we are facing as a polity or in India or anywhere, it is the technology they are talking about. This technology is there, and yesterday, like India is having the maximum road accidents and most fatalities in the world. So they were talking about Indian Road Federation. They were talking about this technology, highway, this thing we are doing, and we are catching you. So, I mean, like everywhere we go in public spaces, you are under CCTV surveillance. So, I feel that, am I a thief? So I mean, but the people who are doing wrong things, they are not, I mean, bothered about these things. They are CCTV surveillance, but they don't bother.
Absolutely.
So I mean, so actually we are talking as a society, as a spiritual person, as a God-fearing person. Why am I not voluntarily adhering to the laws or to the system? Because it's a win-win and it is in my benefit. But people are doing it because of the pressure, because of the technology, because of the law, or whatever reason, not for the right reasons. Like if you are on the road, like Delhi police issued a circular that these places we have installed CCTV, and now if you do red light jumping or if you don't wear seat belt, we will each alarm will be there. So there was this message on WhatsApp that please be careful at these places. Remember these places, so you will be caught. Other places you can do. You can do red light jumping. So this is how people are becoming smart, and this is called smartness. So I'm really wondering where we are, and this is aspirational India.
Absolutely.
Rohit Pant is getting accident in that Tata that is also getting killed
Yeah.
in that accident.
No,
And
no,
a big vehicle and big car and everything. And they are aware persons and celebrities, and still they are not bothering about it.
Absolutely.
So I mean,
I think
the
we are
comment more
moving.
than a question, so I would
See, the question is on the effectiveness of the surveillance state. It is, while everyone is, I mean, there's a big brother of the government watching everything that we are doing. We are going somewhere, there's a CCTV. We are being digitally tracked, as you said. If I'm ordering food on Swiggy or Zomato, they know my food eating patterns or my choices. Everything is being surveyed and
Sir,
under surveillance.
No, sir, my question is different. As we are getting educated and literate, basically illiterate people, they are more, I mean, cautious, they are afraid and they are God-fearing. They are doing it on a voluntary basis. That I should be correct. But the people who are becoming educated and aspirational, they are becoming smart by evading the law. That is my
Correct.
That is my greatness.
So despite the surveillance, educated people are actually flouting,
Yes.
whereas the uneducated people are not so educated. People are actually, because they're God-fearing, they're sticking to laws and following laws.
Being a grassroots activist, I must first protest this educated, uneducated, because we equate poverty to ignorance. We equate rural to ignorance. So let me first re-clarify. There's not the literate and illiterates. I would redefine it what you said. The so-called literates and the very educated illiterates also are there. So both are there. Let me answer your question the way I understood it. I see more a comment than a question. That's exactly what I'm trying to argue in my book. The balance between the surveillance and that. Where does it come from? Most of us, it comes back to moral reasoning. There are two ways in which we reason everything. One is consequentialism, where I write about it, and the other is categorical reasoning. If you categorically believe, I don't care whether I'm washed or not, this is the way dharma is, this is where I live. That is what I'm advocating. That's why dharma of legacy. That's the legacy we need to leave, the legacy of dharma. I'm not going to follow at the signal light if I'm going to stop. For me, Delhi is a fascinating place. I never lived in Delhi. The last 3 years in Delhi, my office is on the 20th floor. I'm waiting for the lift. And people behind me just push the hell out of me. I don't get into the lift at all. I sometimes wonder, I'm standing in line. I could exercise my option as secretary to government and say the lift will only run for me. I follow rules. I stand there. I say I'll go like everybody else, but I can't even get into the lift. And I suddenly ask myself, why? What is this aggressiveness? I'm not generalizing, but I see it more in this part of the country. And I'm standing patiently in line, possibly after 10, 20 minutes standing there. I don't mind because I value what I believe in.
Right.
I don't want to rush into the lift because others are rushing in. That is categorical reasoning. If I'm consequentialist, then I'll worry about the digital state watching over me. Now, it's a call you take. I'm saying Indians, the dharmic way of thinking is categorical. For God's sake, be categorical. You don't care about what others are saying. You will stop at a red light because of you believe in it. I will give you an example and stop there. UK traffic laws, from which we imitated and copied most of our laws. it doesn't talk of driving on the one side of the road. It says you're encouraged to drive on one side of the road. Try driving on the other side today. There's no law in UK actually. You'll get killed. You follow the law not because and the cameras are watching you, whether you're following or not, the police will chase you. But you can actually argue with the police and say the state law doesn't say you should drive on this side. It says you're encouraged to, I don't say, it doesn't say emphatically, it says you could be driving on this side. No, you follow because you don't want to be killed. You follow dharma because you value dharma more than anything else, not because of the state. That's the argument I make.
Absolutely. Very well said. Follow the dharma. Thank you so much, Dr. Balasubramaniam. It's been a very insightful, riveting conversation. Thanks for taking the time out and dropping by to have this conversation with us.
Thank you so much.
So can we have a round of applause for Dr. R. Balasubramaniam and Gaurav? Thank you so much, Dr. R. Balasubramaniam and Gaurav. Before you part, I'll request my colleagues to present a plant as a token of, yes, of course. And as the author himself reminds me, as I had mentioned, there is a author signing table just behind in this room itself. There is a souvenir hall, Vayu, from where you can pick up the books, get it signed from him right away. And someone needs to get me a book. I need to get it signed. Who's going to get? Okay, yeah. Tika, right.